I feel as if we should start with a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen The Odyssey, the Christopher Nolan epic, and you're planning to, if you haven't read any of the translations of The Odyssey, and there are many, or even perhaps read it in the original Homeric Greek, well then perhaps best not to listen to this episode of the podcast until you've done those things, because we don't want to spoil the story. Although, Pele, I think this Odyssey episode of Pele's Poetry Podcast is the perfect prequel to going to see the film or reading a translation, because in a sense it's one of those so complicated stories that the more you know about the story before you go and see it or you read it, the better.
Yeah, the Odyssey. Well, if you say it out loud into the air, it does remind you that it is a word for other things as well. And, the experience of having to tackle the Odyssey of the Odyssey. Now it's come out in the big screen, the wonderful Christopher Nolan. It's almost an epic in itself, isn't it? Now, I know I may be wrong about this because I don't have all my eyes on everything, but I think the main thing is I haven't really seen it mentioned as a poem anywhere. Have you?
No, no. And maybe that's got lost in, dare I say it, in translation. Because I would argue that it works really, really well as a story. It is a ripping yarn.
Mm.
As soon as it's translated from its original Ionian Greek, I think it was, Homeric Greek, and it's, what was it written in, dactylic hexameter, which doesn't lend itself well to English translations, certainly. It loses its poetry and it just becomes a cracking story. But
Well, that's where you're extremely wrong. You obviously haven't read the Robert Fagles translation.
Or the Emily Wilson one, which has been translated and converted into a meter that is perhaps more appropriate for English. Go on then, put me right. Because
I have to be very particular about these translation things. Emily Wilson's translation is in poetic form, but Robert Fagles is in poetic form, and it is the most extraordinary accomplishment in terms of delivering clarity of language in form and with the musicality of the Odyssey. So, in my humble opinion, but if you put the Robert Fagles next to the Emily Wilson, there is absolutely no way that she has triumphed over Fagles' translation. It's simplistic compared to his, but his is not less clear or hard-hitting or spectacular because of its accomplishment. No way. It's more cinematic than hers by a mile.
I tell you what we should do. Before I tell you about the translation that I've read or struggled through or plowed through or picked up and put down probably 1,000 times. It does feel, as you say, like a bit of an Odyssey, reading the Odyssey. We should, there'll be people that don't even know the story. It is an
Go
epic.
on, you Pracy, go on, do it.
Blimey, what are you going to put the stopwatch on and say, I've got 30 seconds? Of course, it's about a bloke called Odysseus, and the Odyssey is his journey. He leaves his home island of Ithaca, in what is now the Ionian Sea in modern Greece, to fight in the Trojan Wars, and that takes 10 years. And then most of the combatants in the Trojan War find their way home, but poor old Odysseus takes another 10 years to get home to his loyal wife, his long-suffering wife Penelope, and their rapidly growing up son Telemachus, and he's detained along the way by all sorts of trials and tribulations. A lovelorn goddess called Calypso, who wants him for herself and detains him on her island Ogygia, or Ogygia, I think it's pronounced, for fully 7 years. And then when he finally, well, before that and after that, he's faced with monsters, he's faced with whirlpools, he visits Hades to speak to the dead. He has to tackle a one-eyed monster who he has to stab in the eye and escape from the cave in which he and his mates are held by hanging onto the underbelly of some sheep. He finally gets back with a little bit of divine intervention from the Greek gods and goddesses, disguised as a beggar, and eventually reveals himself to Penelope and to his son Telemachus, and is restored to his kingdom. Because while he's away, there were lots of blokes, lots of baddies who were trying to bed his wife and to therefore assert their right over his kingdom. So good triumphs over evil in the end. Is that a reasonable summary? I've missed out lots of bits.
Absolutely brilliant. I'm gripped. I've no need to read the poem again now.
Okay. And the best bit from my perspective is the fact that he's away for 19 or 20 years and his dog is still alive when he gets back. His dog, Argus, I think it was. And his dog recognises him along with an old trusted servant. But his dog recognises him, kind of smiles in a way that dogs can at Odysseus, and then promptly dies. So I'm intrigued to know whether that bit is in the Christopher Nolan epic, because some bits have had to be cut, obviously, because the book is 24, 25 books long. Anyway, there's the summary.
That was beautiful. And tell us about Homer then, while you're on a roll.
Okay. Well, was there even a chap called Homer? Most people seem to think that Homer perhaps was a sort of collective rather than an individual, and all of these stories that are put together in the Odyssey were the work of lots of different bards, lots of different storytellers. But it was convenient.
Can I say something to you about that?
Yeah, sorry, convenient to have a single name, Homer.
They say the same thing about Shakespeare, and I've been doing my academic reading the past few days. And apparently that's a load of tosh, that Homer was one bloke like Shakespeare was one bloke. I mean, that's the other side of the argument. They want to create this collective because they want it to be, the Odyssey to be more democratic, or for Shakespeare to be more democratic. I'm just posing that.
Well, and the answer is that ever since what's called the Homeric question was first posed, we are no closer, and never will we be close to a proper answer. We simply don't know. And I think to obsess about that is to lose sight of the brilliance of the story, the brilliance of the poetry, and the potential brilliance of any translation or film version of that story. So let's not worry whether Homer was a poet or not.
I think also the journey of the poem is what really has started to interest me. Like, the poet writes a poem, right? And when it's as great as that one, it does set the poem itself off on its own journey. And of course, Odysseus is the poet, the poem. The voyage is the reader and the reading of the poem, or the telling of the stories all those hundreds and thousands of years ago to the ears of the listeners and the audiences across time. And that is what an epic actually is. So not only are we talking about a journey, but we're also talking about what defines and constructs the epic. And I think the Odyssey can tell us a lot about those things as well, which we can talk about over the passage of our podcast. Anyway, Rich, go on. Sorry.
The Odyssey. Well, you mentioned there the ears of the listeners, and that's instructive because it was constructed, it was conceived as a poem to be heard, not to be read. It was composed,
or looked or seen on the film.
Yeah. It was conceived in pre-literate times, and it was passed on from teller to teller orally, and as a consequence, it acquired extra bits and pieces. They were all bolted on. But what I found fascinating was that people were quite familiar with the work of the gods, and they were quite familiar with the basic story template, the trials and tribulations of the homesick hero. And it was in the telling that the real skill was. And these bards were called rhapsodoi, and they travelled around the Mediterranean as brilliant storytellers. And isn't it wonderful that it was able to have this life of its own? In a way that you can't have a life of your own as soon as you're written down. As soon as you're written down as a poem or as a story, you are not fixed forever, but you are cementing it, and its kind of journey was stopped at the point it was written down, and each translation, of course, is a little different, but cements it still further.
Sometimes when you're dealing with something this vast, it's important to dip into the pools of academe. I don't understand it all, and I definitely didn't have the time to unpick it all, said Penelope. But I did have the time to draw some nuggets from it. And some of the epigrams at the beginning of one of these essays, it says exactly what we're talking about so well. I'll just read it. The theme of the Odyssey is not Odysseus' return to Ithaca. This return is, on the contrary, the death of the Odyssey, its end, so the end of the poem. The theme of the Odyssey is the narrative forming the Odyssey. It is the Odyssey itself. That is the elevator pitch for the essence of the Odyssey. He's coined it. And also, of course, I want to talk about Penelope later, because if you think about it in that way, she is actually the metaphor for the poem itself. But we can talk about that later. Should we talk about translation first, Rich? Because I know you read a fascinating one.
Yeah, well, I haven't read the Emily Wilson one. I haven't read the Robert Fagel translation that you mentioned there. I have had on my bookshelf for 30 plus years a Wordsworth classic, Homer, the Odyssey, translated by T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. It is like walking through the bloody desert with no shoes on a 50-degree plus day.
Why?
It's hard work. Look, I think if I kind of, just in front of me now, I'm holding the book, and you know when you sort of hold a book that's been well thumbed, it kind of fans out. Well, this one fans out to about where it gets about as far as page 23, book 2, and the rest of the book is not quite as well thumbed. It's one of those books that you have but you probably don't read, or that you make a start on and you think you really ought to, and then stop because it is hard work. So I think actually the Christopher Nolan film is a great way of getting people into this wonderful story. And if poetry isn't mentioned anywhere in the publicity for the film, if it's not clear within the film itself that this was originally a performed poem, well, does it actually matter? Because it might bring people to poetry.
Well, sure. I mean, that's one argument, but aren't they missing a trick? I mean, I find it slightly suffocating and unnerving that they haven't mentioned the source and the root, what this story is rooted in. I get the feeling that they don't want to distract from their narrative, the Hollywood narrative, which is A, B, C, D, E, by disturbing people with the idea that it's a poem. I imagine they also think, it might scare people away if they think it's a poem. Now, all that to me is contrary to every single principle of art and the arts that should exist. But yes, of course, it will bring people to the Odyssey. But what kind of Odyssey will it bring them to on reflection? I mean, who are the people holding the cards, handling the question of the Odyssey and the further investigation? I hope they're treating their extraordinary esteemed position with respect.
Yeah, I take a slightly more pragmatic view than you, clearly. The cards that they hold they're Hollywood movie moguls, and he's a British director, of course, Christopher Nolan, isn't he? And
he's brilliant.
I can't judge the film because I haven't seen it yet. I will go and see it, and then I'll come perhaps to a different view. But it's doing what Hollywood does, which tells a great story, a great tale, and it's got so many different close escapes and close shaves from whirlpools and octopuses, potentially, the Scylla, from, as I say, lovelorn women who want to detain him on their island and keep him Odysseus for herself. It's got everything. Mm-hmm. It's got the patient wife. Sure. I mean, what more do you need for a story? But I take your point also that how honest do you want to be, or how slavish do you want to follow the original spirit?
I just think you need to talk about what something is rooted in when you're dealing with the arts and writing and storytelling. You know, people love to talk about storytelling at the moment, and I get it, you know, but storytelling comes from somewhere. And it's very important that we respect what this idea, even the idea of storytelling, where it has come from. And it has come from poetry, you know, and poetry has the crown, and we need to, you know, admire that and acknowledge it.
So, would you say this then is the first poem, one of the first poems, or one of the first novels, one of the first stories, or can it be at once both?
They're inextricably linked. They are woven together inextricably. And also, I don't know if that actually is the most important thing. For me, what's important is the motor of it, you know, how it moves and how it grows and evolves, and how the characters in the story define the very act of storytelling itself. And that has carried us through right now to this point, to Nolan's film.
And is there always a sense in which, when a book or a poem is turned into a film, that it kind of takes away the pictures you hold in your head? Our imaginations are powerful, and everybody renders their own version in their own heads, depending on how their heads and their imaginations work. And there can be, it can be spoiled, can't it, by one person's interpretation of that story. Which is why I guess so many people are disappointed when they go and see the film of their favourite book. It's no longer quite the book that they thought it was. Someone has stolen something from them. I
Like
wonder.
when you take photos of people and they say, if you take a photo of me, you're stealing my soul. I think it works the other way, doesn't it?
It would be wonderful, impossible, but wonderful to bring somebody from 6th, 7th century BC who watched the performance of the Odyssey over. It must have taken several days to perform. You know, perhaps it was performed over a summer season. I don't know, but to bring them to the 21st century and to sit them into an IMAX theatre to watch Christopher Nolan's version, would they be astonished, astounded, pleased, displeased? Would they go, "Oh, we've really spoiled"? Obviously in Greek. Would they say, "Oh, we've really spoiled the Odyssey for me. It was much, much better when it was in my head"?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and maybe the way to think about that is to think about how it now feels to us to hear the poem recited orally into our ears with no visual stimulation at all. Maybe we can reach their amazement by reversing it and giving ourselves what they gave to themselves, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and of course, some of the techniques that were required to put an idea or a characterization or an event into somebody's head, and to keep it there in their head for the days or weeks or potentially months that it took to tell the whole tale. They seem rather sort of slavish and boring for today's audiences potentially. So repetition, repeating a point, driving it home, the use of simile, of epithets and I can never say that word. Epithets. So there are lots of devices within the Odyssey that just seem strange to a modern ear.
Let me read this tiny extract about Odysseus, because as we said, it's all in the characters in the story. You know, it doesn't belong to us until it belongs to them. And this is a tiny extract about Odysseus finding the great bow after he comes home. He's the only one who can string this bow and shoot it, the arrow from it. Hundreds have tried, all Penelope's suitors. Thus the suitors spoke, but cunning Odysseus, after he lifted up the great bow and looked at it from all sides, as when a man who is skilled in the lyre and song easily stretches a lyre string around a new peg, fastening the well-twisted sheep gut at both ends, just so, and without effort, Odysseus immediately strung the great bow. Now, you know, that's I think that's everything we've just said, repeated in about 8 lines, 100 words or less.
Yeah, and you were there in the scene watching him string that bow. My understanding is that it is his bow that has been waiting for his return, and that the test, if you like, to prove to Penelope that he is not a beggar, but is indeed the returned Odysseus, is to put it to the test. If he can both string his bow and shoot an arrow straight through a line of, I think it was 12 axe heads, she would be absolutely sure. And then when she discovers it is him, they go off to bed together, and he whispers a few things that will prove to her that he is who he says he is. Yeah.
Sorry, I was late.
Sorry, I've been away. Yeah, sorry, it's been 20 years, love. Gosh, hasn't Telemachus grown? He's a strapping lad now. Because his story, actually, I mean, you know, another point. There's so many things to say about the Odyssey that I feel as if we could have a sort of series, a whole series of episodes about the Odyssey. We could be on our own Odyssey, but the story starts in the middle. Isn't it called something like in medias res or something like that? Because people are so familiar with the story, it doesn't really matter where you leap in. And then it's very modern in a sense that it sort of uses flashbacks to tell the story of why it's taken him so long to get back. And the first 5 books, I think at least, really deal with Penelope and the young Telemachus, who is not, he's a bit weedy really. He's not very brave, and he doesn't think he can take on his mother's suitors. And in the end, he grows a pair, as you might say in modern parlance, and decides to go off in search of his father, with a little bit of help from Athena, one of the Greek gods. And because he's grown this pair, and he's become a threat to the suitors, to the throne of Ithaca, they decide to kill him, to plot to assassinate him, but he nips off on a boat looking for his dad before that happens. So it's a very modern way of telling a story, starting in the middle and then working your way simultaneously out to either end, using all sorts of flashbacks and different devices.
And then you have the sort of the score, the musical score running through the whole story, which is Penelope, who is sitting at her loom weaving and unweaving everything that she weaves, because it's for the shroud for Odysseus, isn't it? And she's saying, you know, he's dead, my husband's dead. She thinks he is, but she's damned if she's going to marry some greedy bastard who wants to take his kingdom. So she pretends that it's taking her a very long time to weave this shroud for her husband, and she has to weave a story, and then she has to unpick it again just to keep the motion going. And I have another lovely quote here, an epigram from this essay. In the literal act of weaving, material and design emerge simultaneously from a single process. So with Penelope, the action of weaving and unweaving does not fashion a device, but constitutes the device itself. Isn't that amazing? That's Laura Slatkin, Composition by Theme and the Metis of the Odyssey.
You'd have thought, Pele, that a great poem like the Odyssey would inspire, would stimulate others to write their own, not translations, but to be stimulated into writing their own sort of poem, a poetic response, if you like, much shorter rather than book length. But when I looked, there wasn't that much. There was a short poem by Margaret Atwood, written from the perspective of the sirens, these two mermaids, as some people see them, who called seductively from the rocks to seafarers, and the seafarers, if they heard their songs, would throw themselves overboard and drown, or steer to the rocks and founder. And it's a great bit of the story in the Odyssey, where Odysseus sticks wax in his sailors' ears so that they can't hear the sirens, and he himself wants to hear them, but fears being sent adrift, so he straps himself to the mast. But that poem aside, and a few others, there doesn't seem to be very much. Is it because it's really complicated to do, or too difficult a text? For what reason?
Well, testament to Nolan, you know, tackling it exactly. I think in the main, to me, the Odyssey is in every single poem and book. I hope that doesn't sound like a cheat answer, but I really do mean it. Like, it's like Keats with his negative capability, isn't it? You know, he allowed the artist to create things that were incomplete or unresolved inside themselves. Such a radical idea. And Homer, as you said earlier, you know, he gave us the structure of storytelling, you know, this idea of flashbacks and cutting in, and the mantra of Penelope weaving the actual meta meaning of what he's doing as a storyteller. I think it's running through all our veins all the time, you know. So when somebody takes it, and also like Dante, you know, translations of the Inferno, when somebody takes it on, actually takes it on, it becomes an epic journey in its own right. Yes, it's extremely difficult.
When somebody takes it on, by that you mean somebody like Derek Walcott, the St. Lucian poet, who, if you like, reinterpreted the Odyssey in his epic, Omeros.
I think I've said before, he's one of my hero poets. And this, to me, really does explain why. To take the Odyssey to St. Lucia, to give the words and stories to fishermen and women of the island, and to keep its profound epic nature, and in poetic form. I think it's in terza rima, and to keep as entertaining as Homer's Odyssey is absolutely astonishing. Walcott distributes the heroism across a community, though. No single figure carries the poem. The St. Lucian fishermen collectively bear the epic weight. It's so beautifully done. Quote, "This is a deliberate democratization of the form. The epic belongs to ordinary people, not just kings." Now, you know, you were talking earlier about how Homer was maybe lots of voices, and that maybe that doesn't matter. But this matters, that a modernization of the Odyssey can be given and distributed in a different way inside the poem, not around it with all this chat about who did what, when, and where. And then the other lovely thing is that in Homer, Helen of Troy is never there. She's absent. She's just an imagination, fought over and spoken about. But in Omeros, Helen is a St. Lucian woman working as a waitress, vivid and fully realized and chatty. So how beautiful is that? Also, there is no homecoming in Omeros, because obviously ideas of it's a poem of return, but for the descendants of enslaved people, the original home is irrecoverable. Fantastic. Anyway, pick it up, read it. I have got a little extract which I could read, which I will.
So to be clear, Philocete is a character in Homer's Odyssey, but he is also a character in Derek Walcott's interpretation of the Odyssey. Its characters mirror Homer's characters. Walcott's characters mirror Homer's characters.
Yeah, so he goes into a rum shop, doesn't he? Because his wound's hurting, drinking rum, looking out to sea. Whereas the guy in Homer, he's probably on some island without any rum to be seen.
I know which version I'd rather be stuck in, the one with the rum.
But what is wrong with you, Philocete? I am blessed with this wound, Ma Kilman, which will never heal. Well, you must take it easy. Go home and lie down. Give the foot a little rest. Philocete, his trouser leg rolled, stares out to sea from the worn rum shop window. The itch in the sore tingles like the tendrils of the anemone and the puffed blister of Portuguese man-o'-war.
Wow, that's beautiful. The puffed blister of Portuguese men of war.
And that's so Homeric, isn't it? Walcott's
Absolutely.
not only bloody written his own Odyssey, but he also alludes to the original author so beautifully.
In his use of simile there.
Yeah, and just the language, just the epic. Walcott understands where I imagine Nolan doesn't. How pivotal the language is to this story. They are inextricable, so Walcott had to absorb that Homeric weight in order to reach his own story.
Will Penelope and Odysseus have American accents? Matt Damon plays Odysseus, Anne Hathaway plays Penelope. I mean, it doesn't matter, does it, at one level? Because, hey, English translations are, of course, necessarily, completely mincing the original pronunciation of the names in any case. We say Circe. The Greeks probably said Karke. So who cares at one level? But just, I don't know, an American accent kind of get in the way. Does it spoil it for you? Will you go and see it, Pele?
I was just going to say, Rich, are we going to go and see it?
I
don't know if I dare.
I think we should. I think perhaps after we've done so, we could perhaps do another podcast, another episode that would be necessarily better informed about whether Nolan has done a good job of it or not.
In terms of modern interpretation, I have become completely fascinated and obsessed. I always have been a little bit, by James Joyce's portrayal of Molly Bloom, who is the last speaker in Ulysses. And she is the modern Penelope. And the way that Joyce returns Penelope to this modern framework of the female mind in her modern self is just so moving. Penelope is only ever spoken about in the Odyssey, but Molly speaks out herself for 40 pages without interruption and without anyone else's voice cutting across hers. Oh, the dream. The shift from object to subject is total. So, and Penelope's disembodied, she's a non-sexual creature in her waiting. But Molly is lying in bed after a romp in the hay with her lover, as she waits for her hero to come home. Penelope's story ends in reunion. Molly's monologue ends with one of the most famous passages in all of literature. So I'm just going to read the last little bit of Molly. As a girl, where I was a flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair, like the Andalusian girls used, or shall I wear a red yes? And how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well him as another. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I yes to say yes, my mountain flower? And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts all perfume. Yes, and his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said, yes, I will. Yes. There, Penelope with a modern voice.
And Ulysses, of course, James Joyce's rendition of the Odyssey in any case. So that's perhaps an omission on my part. There's me saying there aren't many poets that have been
we just
inspired by the Odyssey. And of course there's that. That one, Rich. Brilliant. And another one we haven't mentioned that comes to mind as we've been talking, and a poet we've talked about very much on Pele's Poetry Podcast a couple of episodes back, Constantine P. Cavafy. His perhaps most famous work, Ithaca, talks about the Odyssey, the journey, and of course, that very much resonates with today. We're all on a journey, aren't we? We're all on a personal Odyssey. There are trials and tribulations of a much more minor nature than, I don't know, whirlpools and octopuses and cyclops, but nonetheless, we're all on that journey. So we would ask people to have a little listen to our Cavafy episode. Links to that and all of our episodes, of course, Forbidden Love, yes, of course, that was the subtitle of
What
that
number
particular
is the
episode, wasn't it?
episode, Rich? Can you
Oh
remember?
gosh. Oh, I don't know.
We've done
We're
so
getting to the
many.
point now where we have as many episodes as there are books in the Odyssey. Well, not quite yet, but
Our little
we're getting
steam
there.
ship.
Yeah. But as always, links to the poems we've touched on, to the books we've talked about, any references, perhaps even little potted biographies of the Odyssey will appear on the Pele's Poetry podcast website at pelecox.com.